couple of hours, and we'd be happy to answer any questions the committee might have.
I just have a quick question. We use the word facilities kind of loosely. We have 7 contract facilities. Are these some of the alternative housing placements, the fire camps, or do we have 7 contracted actual prisons?
So there,
I thought we had 2.
excuse me, thank you, Jay Verbal, and thanks. We have 7 individuals such as Desert View, Central Valley. There's 3 located in the McFarland area itself, 1 female and 2 males. So they are with, up and down the state of California, and they average between about 550 beds and 700 beds. And a few of those are also municipalities that would be like Delano, Shafter, Taft.
And they're not reentry facilities?
They do have some services that are there, but they are not a reentry service or center. They're actually a standalone facility.
Okay, Mr. Verbal, could you give us a list of those institutions and how many people are in each one? And I guess their level?
I can. I could actually. Would you like to know today?
Yeah,
Well,
but I'd like to have it in writing afterwards too, so you
We'd be
could,
happy to forward that to you then in writing,
or
if that's okay.
just go to the copy machine or whatever.
That'd be great. I
Yeah.
can forward those to you afterwards if that's okay.
But you can read it if you want.
We have Central Valley Modified Correctional Facility with 700 beds. Desert View with 700 beds. Delano has 578 beds. Shafter has 640 beds. Taft has 600 beds. The female facility has 300 beds. That's the FCRF. And that makes up the...
Okay, now what's California City?
So California City is a little bit different. That's a kind of a bifurcated model. That is
It's the private
It was a
building.
facility that was a private building that the state had leased, and now it's actually ran as a state facility.
Okay. So it really is an additional prison then. So we have, you could say we have 35.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, and I'd like to have that in writing because I didn't realize we had so many private facilities.
Most certainly.
Yeah. Okay, LAO, any comments?
Aaron Edwards with the LAO. We have not raised any concerns with this proposal.
DOF, any comments? Any questions from the subcommittee? Yeah, Senator
If
Bell?
we're going to get some information back, I'd kind of like to know what the total cost of medical care in the facility, in the 7 facilities is, and, you know, were they required when they originally created to, with contracts, I assume, to have a certain level of medical care, and has that medical care been provided in terms of the contracts? So that I want to see how much money we're spending on medical care in those facilities. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And we're happy to provide that information. Just for your knowledge, the contracts as they exist today have a half-time physician and the 24/7 RN coverage. But we'll get you the costs for each of the facilities.
Yeah, and I think we'll revisit this in our population discussion again.
right.
Because if our population is going down, and we did realignment, and we have actually 7 additional contract facilities, and really a 35th prison because it's staffed by state personnel in a building that we're leasing. Again, what is the plan eventually to move people back into state facilities, to begin to cut some of the costs? It seems like we must have the same, do we have the same number of individuals that we're incarcerating as before, but we've just opened more institutions, but they're called contract facilities? You know,
When you say as before, what kind of timeline?
when we had 187 million people or whatever in our prison system.
We do not. That number that was previously in the 180,000 range is now just below 130.
No, I know it is, but where we just move people, that's why
That
I'm interested
includes
in the
the contract.
number of people that we have and what the plans are really for population management other than opening new contract facilities. Because, again, many of us are hearing from our constituents and our colleagues is they didn't expect this, and they didn't expect costs to keep going up even as the population was going down. And although you may have to spend to save, as they say, what's the plan here, really? And I think, we're very concerned about that. At any rate, are there any comments from the public on this? Seeing and hearing none, my recommendation would be we approve as budgeted. Please read the roll.
Madam Chair,
Aye.
Senator Anderson. Senator Bell.
Okay, we'll keep the roll open so Senator Bell can vote when he returns. Okay, issue number 2, access to health care. CDCR.
Okay, with this issue, the department requests $9.4 million in 78.4 positions in budget year, $11.8 million and 98.7 positions in 17-18, and $12.2 million and 102 positions in 2018-19 and ongoing. This includes resources for phased-in custody staffing at our new space created through our healthcare facility improvement projects, more often referred to as our HICFIP projects. It also includes custody staffing identified by the receiver's office at our various healthcare access unit spaces, which include our triage and treatment areas and our correctional treatment centers. And then lastly, it includes non-custody staffing to oversee the operation of the new chilled water plant at our Ironwood State Prison. The HICFIP augmentation specifically involves 39 projects at 23 different institutions, and the custody staffing for those spaces have been determined by CDCR's standardized staffing team consistent with the staffing that exists at the current space. Concerning the healthcare access portion, when oversight of these areas was formally delegated from the receiver to the Secretary of CDCR back in 2012, the department had just completed its review of staffing and come up with our standardized staffing model that was released. As a result of that, the reviews, which formally established the custody healthcare position needs, was not factored into that analysis. Since then, DAI, in collaboration with Division of Adult Institutions at CDCR, in collaboration with the receiver's office, has identified 18 institutions with custody staffing deficiencies within the healthcare access unit areas. This staffing is necessary to allow CDCR to continue to offer inmates adequate access to healthcare. I'm joined again by Ms. Hayhoe from the receiver's office and also by Ms. Kathy Allison of our Division of Adult Institutions, and we're happy to answer any questions the committee might have.
Okay, thank you. LAO, any comments?
We have raised one concern with this proposal, and it relates to the small portion of the request for staffing at Ironwood State Prison for the new HVAC system. We think that request is overfunded by about $275,000 because it does not reflect savings from avoided maintenance costs on the pre-existing HVAC system, which would no longer be incurred when the new system is installed.
Okay, thank you. Department of Finance?
Kia Chow, Department of Finance. I also just wanted to add that for the healthcare improvement project request, that additional staffing is not requested for all of the HICFIT projects. So there's about 14 of the projects where the department was able to just use existing staff. So that new staff is not added for that, but they're really only asking for staffing for projects where there's like a new building or a new layout where the existing staff could not reasonably be redirected.
Yeah, thank you for that. I do think this raises the larger issue of standardized staffing. And I understand very well why it was adopted originally. We had a 6-to-1 inmate to staff ratio. Small changes in population ended up creating fluctuations in staff. That is not a good thing. However, the way we're looking at standardized staffing now, it seems like no matter how much the population drops, the staffing will stay the same, and there's nothing to do but add staff if you add any new activity. I know there's the addition of staff because we're now offering community college education, addition of staff, and this kind of job creep is very expensive in the long term, and it would seem to me that we ought to be looking at ways not to go back to a simple ratio that changes all the time, but to make some flexible accommodation to the fact that if our prison population is really going down, there ought to be some ability of management to move people around. And I just wondered if you have any comment on that.
I don't want to get ahead of ourselves on the agenda, and I'll let Ms. Allison speak to the staffing package and whether it's the correct approach operationally. But I did want to point out that the next agenda item actually speaks to
Yes.
reductions that often occur at where standardized staffing is subject to these changes, these reductions as well, where we see conversions occur within our housing units.
And then we move people around so we don't have to keep adding? Or do we
Right.
consider that we're adding, but we're also subtracting?
It's a product of moving our inmates into those housing units that don't have as robust a staffing demand as those other, in this case, segregated
so-
housing.
And we will get to the
Yes.
the Ashkar settlement issue and some of that. But I'm concerned with it really as a larger issue. And one thing I don't know was, is this a product of collective bargaining, so it will never change unless collective bargaining allows it?
Standardized staffing?
Or was that a management decision?
It's our understanding that there's no language in the main contract or anything specifying it. It was sort of a budgeting methodology. It gets back into principle. What we originally discussed is the old model where you budgeted 6 inmates for
Yeah.
every staff member. An institution really can't operationalize reductions in that way because you need people that, monitor the housing unit. Healthcare has its own needs. Rehabilitative programs have their own needs, and having custody staff available doesn't really change for every 6 inmates. So this really
Yeah, we
principally
agree.
went back to kind of making sure that there was sufficient correctional staff to have a functional prison system. And as the department's pointing out, that when there are changes to subpopulations, as there was with ADSEG and SHU under the Ashker settlement, or there are changes that reduce the level of a yard and change the staff, we are coming back and making those adjustments to the legislature. But there are also the alternate side of that when there's new space, there are additional space, or we want coverage on a different watch, that additional staff is necessary. But we think that that is important because we value those services and we want those services to happen. So having the appropriate staff available to make them happen is sort of the intention of the model, and not sort of having that no centralized autonomy or transparency on how an institution's operating. It sort of allows for a framework that they have sufficient staff to provide safety and other ancillary services.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or comments from members of the committee? Are there any comments from the public on this? I noticed that everybody does seem to agree on the reduction.
Craig Brown for California
Thank you.
Correctional Peace
Mr. Brown.
Officers Association. Speaking to your comment about standardized staffing, they're right, it is not a part of the collective bargaining agreement, but to the extent it does affect working conditions, there is some meet and confer requirements. But I think more importantly, it isn't the numbers that only drive this, it's the inmates that are left. In other words, it's just like your bill load. If you have 10 bills and you get rid of 5 easy ones, doesn't mean you can cut your staff in half if you keep the 5 hard ones. We're in a system where we've kept the hard inmates. with the ones who need escort to medical, the ones with mental health issues. We're trying to do more programming, which means we're programming. In our view, standardized staffing has actually resulted in many institutions being understaffed because the inmates are requiring more escorts. Again, to get to all the things you want to happen requires moving inmates. Moving inmates requires correctional supervision. So there are many cases where we actually think standardized staffing, the administration has relied on it to tell us no on places where we think there is very valid workload that should result in more staff.
Okay, good point. Thank you very much. Okay, that was comments from the public. So the recommendation would be that we reject the 525,000 general fund and stationary engineer positions and hold open the rest of the items. So the vote is basically on the agreed upon reduction. It moved by Senator Bell. Please read the roll.
Madam Chair?
Aye.
Senator Anderson? Senator Bell?
Okay, that motion carries, and we'll consider the rest. Now, moving on to issue number 3, the segregated housing unit conversion, which is a reduction in the general fund of 16 million or 28 million next year, from a reduction in the number of inmates housed in segregated housing units, otherwise known as solitary confinement. And this is due to the settlement in the Ashkar v. Brown lawsuit, which will reduce the number of inmates held in solitary confinement and convert the units to less expensive general population housing units. And I think that CDCR is estimating that the number of inmates held in solitary confinement will decline by about 1,000. But that also, there is an increase to increase 48 correctional officer positions to do investigative workload from an anticipated increase in gang activity. Maybe you could tell us about that.
Okay. Just to restate the numbers, and I'm going to go ahead and give the net of everything that you
Okay,
just
sure.
described. This proposal is a $16 million and 145.6 position reduction in current year, growing to 22.2 million and 207 positions in budget year 2016-17. As you mentioned, to account for the housing or mission changes made within the last year. In the segregated housing area specifically. A majority of the bed reduction that we're seeing can actually be attributed to various statewide policy and regulation changes made by CDCR in an effort to mitigate inmate placements in our ADSEG housing specifically, and to reduce the overall length of stay in those units. As you mentioned, another contributing factor is the Ashker versus Brown settlement, whereby the department has moved away from a system of indeterminate terms for our segregated housing areas to a system that focuses on determinate terms for behavior-based violations specifically. So these efforts have resulted in the decrease in the number of inmates housed in these segregation areas, which is leading to this proposal. The reduction in funding and positions is tied to the fact that the security staffing, and this is what I started to talk about earlier, the security staffing in our general population areas is less robust than that exists within the segregated housing areas. The numbers that I provided are the net and do involve, as you just mentioned, the addition of 48 ISU correctional officers at those institutions that either have received or are scheduled to receive these previously segregated housing inmates. Given the uncertainty associated with the workload these housing changes will ultimately bring about, of the 48 positions we're requesting, 22 are ongoing, while 26 are 2-year limited term positions. I'm joined again by Ms. Kathy Allison of our Division of Adult Institutions, who, with your permission, will begin by addressing the questions that were listed on the agenda, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions that the committee has beyond that.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Allison.
I'll just try Jason. I apologize. It's an accumulative effort of a variety of things that we've reduced our segregated population. When we talk about segregated population, we're talking about administrative segregation as well as our security housing units, commonly known as SHU. We have converted 23 buildings to date, and more to come. We've reduced our population, total beds, about 3,168 beds for ASU and approximately 1,000 SHU beds if we converted to GP. So all those housing units have converted to general population housing units or are in the process. Some needed some physical plant modifications in order to convert. So we have some more pending. So overall reduction of our ASU population, ASU and SHU, is about 5,500. So a significant decrease in that population over the last several years. That Asker settlement is part of the SHU reduction, but the ASU reductions were policy changes that the department independently made to reduce what actually goes into an administrative segregation. So rules violations that would result in placement. So we took off about 4 or 5 rules violations that typically went into ASU. We took those off out of our regs, so they no longer go into. They're handled on the yard. They'll still have a rules violation, but it doesn't result in segregated placement. That coupled with, we reduced the amount of time somebody has to serve while in what we call a SHUable offense, whether it's being served in an administrative segregation setting or ultimately a SHU setting. We went from them having to do 75% of that time down to half. So significant decrease in the numbers. We also put a few other measures in place as far as having the institutional classification committees evaluate them sooner so that they ensure to get placement quicker. We do regular monitoring at a headquarters level to ensure that the average length of stay and inmates are moving along. Greatly reduce our average length of stay in our administrative segregation areas. That coupled obviously with the SHU population. Originally, at the time of the Asker settlement, there were approximately 1,780 inmates that needed an evaluation. Of that, 925 have received that evaluation and have either subsequently been released or waiting on the typical process to get released, but 925. So we have approximately 525 remaining review. We are totally on target for our October 2016 timeline. In fact, I'm confident that we'll reach it much sooner than that. One of the questions had to do with specialized programming available to the SHU inmates. Now, prior to the Asker settlement, we did have what we call the Step 5 process, which did provide very specific programming. Unfortunately, due to the expedited process to get these guys out, there's not specific programming offered to them to reintegrate back into the general population. However, once in the general population, they are available to participate in well over 1,000 ILTAG programs available in the institutions, as well as our rehabilitative programs.
Okay, and why could the training not, the specialized programming that was in Step 5 be offered in Step 4?
The Asker settlement, the Step 5 program is really for offenders that still had a rules violation that had a nexus to STG. So the ones that are being released now have been totally disciplinary free for a very specific amount of time and do not have that nexus to STG. So they were totally released back to the general population.
So you would think, though, there could be some special programming. And I do have to say here, I did carry a bill, and we had extensive hearings on solitary confinement in the Policy and Budget Committee. And the bill was very similar to the Ashkar settlement, but CDCR is opposed to many parts of it.